Hi everyone, Amanda here. Welcome back to my book nook. So today we're going to be discussing Killers of the Flower Moon. This is a true crime nonfiction book by David Graham, and it is about murders happening in the Osage Nation and ultimately the investigation that is conducted by the Bureau of Investigation, which ultimately became the FBI. So it's kind of the birth of the FBI, this investigation. So in the 1920s, the Osage Indians were some of the wealthiest people in the United States because their lands had oil on them. And even when the American government came in and were having these lands auctioned off so white people could settle them, the way that things were written is the head rights, which were the rights to the minerals, the oils, the natural resources of the land, could not be sold off, and they were passed down within the Osage family that owned them. So while the land may have been owned by white people, what was being taken out of it was still owned by the Osage natives. But in the 1920s, early 1920s, like around 1922, they start realizing that the Osage Indians are getting murdered. There are people getting shot, there's people getting poisoned, and there's a lot of death going on that they can't figure out what's happening. The local police can't figure anything out, but at the same time they're not really putting forth a whole lot of effort in it. One woman, who is the main focus in regards for this story, her family, her sister's killed, shot, her mother dies, poisoned, and then her other sister and her husband die when their house is blown up by a bomb. One of the other things that is talked about with this story is the idea of guardianship. Full-blooded Indigenous people were seen as childlike. They were too young to be able to take care of their money on their own, so they would be given a white guardian who would be in charge of all their money. And, if someone was sick, they had to go ask their guardian for money. If they wanted to buy something, they had to ask their guardian for money, and the guardian had to approve of it. We'll come back to that in a little bit. So, going on in Washington, D.C., you have a young J. Edgar Hoover who is in a little bit of a problem because there's been already some scandals of the Bureau of Investigation that are connected to him, and he's going to send down one of his investigators, who is a former Texas Ranger named Tom White, along with a few others, but Tom is the only official agent working this. Everyone else is kind of being able to be CIs for him. That way they can intermingle into the community and learn more. And Tom's job is to figure out why in these past about 2 to 3 years, 34 Osage natives have been murdered. Tom ultimately is able to connect Molly's sisters, her brother-in-law, her mother, and one other man who turns out to be Molly's father-in-law, who was doing all this and was now slowly working on trying to poison Molly through his son, with his son's assistance, to end up getting control of the head rights. Because the way in Molly's family went is, as all of those other family members died, all of the head rights were going to her. And if she died, they would go to her husband and their children, which would mean the father-in-law would also have access to this money. The other person is someone that he had ultimately gotten a life insurance policy on, saying that he owed him money, and that person then later died. And it takes a very, very long time for this case to end up going to court and a verdict putting Molly's father-in-law in prison. And while Tom and the other members of the Bureau of Investigation were trying to find what was going on with some of the other murders, they couldn't connect them to the one case that they knew who things were. So it kind of fell to the wayside. The author, David Graham, ends up going to the area, meeting up with people who were surviving family of the Osage natives that had been murdered and everything, and ends up through some of his own independent research figuring out that many of these people were probably killed by their guardians in order to get more access to their money, or people were loaning them money, putting life insurance policies on them for regards for the money that they had borrowed, and then these Osage were winding up dead. So because of how wealthy these people were, they were getting murdered for their money and for the rights of the minerals and oil and everything on the lands. All in all, lots of information. This book is almost 400 pages long. It does not look like it. It is very dense. It is a very surprisingly heavy book for how thin it is. Throughout it, one of the things that's great is they have images and pictures of the people, so you can actually see who they were and feel a little bit more of that connection to them. So I'm going to say this is probably an 8. Relatively about the same as Radium Girls, because again, you're feeling a lot of connection to everyone. It does have a slightly more textbook, less novel-based feel, but for this it works so well because it's written like a crime novel, which is at times going to have a little bit more of a textbooky type feel than other types of novels. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a very interesting way to learn about how the FBI ended up getting started. They don't sugarcoat the fact that Hoover had a lot of controversies and a lot of scandals and wasn't a good person. They go over what happens to Molly and Tom and other people who were connected to these cases as it went on. And I really loved how, even though while the Bureau only was able to figure out what happened to that small group, that he went and did some more investigation to find out what all else was happening, because he didn't think it wasn't right that only the few people were able to get some level of justice. And even though may not have gotten legal justice, at least what happened got learned. So again, 8 out of 10. I recommend reading it. I think it's really good, especially if you have any interest in true crime. So like the video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so when I post up other videos, you'll know about them. Thank you, and bye.